Hi, everyone, and welcome to this next episode of the Sustainable Connections podcast. If you listen in regularly at all, you might recognize my voice and know my name. I'm Mark Lee. I'm the Global Director of Thought Leadership at ERM, and I feel really lucky to host these conversations, which are always additional insight and learning for me, and I hope for all of you who choose to join us. As we explore across kind of what kind of connections in sustainability make sense, we've looked at cultural, we've looked at sort of traditional technologies. Today, we're going to stray more into digital realms. And we're going to look at technological innovation and digital solutions that are driving change in the sustainability field and how they create value for business, partly time value in terms of resource, but also commercial value in terms of the outcomes that you can realize. We're going to zoom in specifically on a product from Salesforce that many of you will probably know as Net Zero Cloud, but which has just been renamed. And we're going to hear more about that as Agentforce Net Zero. And we're going to look at how that technology and other similar digital technologies can help organizations reach both their sustainability and their business goals. As ever, I am completely incapable of doing this alone. And I have a couple of guests here that are going to help me unpick this learning and kind of go on this journey with me. One of those is Prashanthi Sudhakar, who is the head of product for Net Zero Cloud, or I guess for Agentforce Net Zero at Salesforce now. Prashanthi, welcome. Say hello.
Hi there, Mark. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate the time.
Terrific. It is great to have you here. And also with us is Meera Krishnan, who is a managing consultant for Net Zero Cloud Solutions. You're obviously going to need a new title, Meera, that reflects the new naming of Net Zero as well, here at ERM. And Meera, please say a quick hello.
Hi, Mark. It's great to meet you and happy to be on the podcast.
Awesome. I mean, before we go into the detail of all this, I actually want to know just a little bit more about each of you. And you could maybe tell me what's behind your title. What does that actually mean? What does a person who carries that title for you, Prashanthi, as head of product, do? But also, sustainability technology is kind of on the newer edge of this field. It's kind of penetrating more and more deeply. How's your career put you in the role that you're in today? So Prashanthi first, and then Meera, same question will follow for you.
Yeah, so I joined Salesforce almost a year ago as the head of product for Agentforce Net Zero, or erstwhile Net Zero Cloud. And as the head of product, a big part of my role is around figuring out the vision and what the product should evolve into, and how does it cater the different needs of our existing customers as well as our new customers, given that the whole sustainability landscape is constantly evolving. But the other part of it is, as a product person, you're constantly looking at ensuring that the product is sticky so that people feel good about using it. The experience is seamless. That's a big, big part of my job. Now, more around how did my interest with sustainability start? So as someone who's born and raised in India, I was raised in Bangalore, but during my vacations, I would always often go to like rural parts of India. And it was fascinating for me at a young age to see that dichotomy in the energy access aspect of it. So in some places, there would be power outages for like almost 10 hours, which is not something that we experienced, in a city, which is very baffling. And one thing led to another. That was the first point where, my interest peaked in. And then eventually that led to me becoming an electrical engineer. And then I wanted to like stay true to it. So I joined Schneider Electric. So I was at Schneider Electric for 15 years. And I was always at the cusp of product strategy and business development, predominantly the energy management, energy transition, and sustainability space. And then was at Johnson Controls for a couple of years, and then had a minor stint of creating my own companies. And then eventually, since I've always been in the product space, when I was approached for this role, given sustainability is all about data, and that has been a big, big part of a recurring theme in my career, I really jumped on the opportunity. And here's how I landed here.
Fantastic. No, and I find asking that question or similar that those personal early experiences have often shaped careers in our field, not dissimilar to you. I went on a high school exchange from Canada to Brazil when I was 15, 16 years old. And at that point, Brazil, I think, had the highest Gini coefficient in the world, the measure of inequity. And I was just stunned, I think, in that same way that you were going to rural areas and realizing how big some of the gaps were. And that set me on a path where I wanted to do development work, which turned into sustainable development work. And It all makes sense when you look backwards, right? Meera, what about for you? How did you end up here with us today?
I think for me, I did actually have some early childhood memories that are quite similar to what Prashanthi is describing. I'm also of Indian origin, and growing up, we would go to India fairly often, relatively speaking, at least. And I too was just completely struck by the level of inequity that you see in places like India, where you have limited access to natural resources and energy that we take for granted in our lives here. And so that sort of always stuck with me. And then I think, as I got older, I found that sustainability really spoke to me because it's so interconnected with other parts of society in general, right? So, like, sustainability is something that impacts health. When you think about like environmental health and health disparities between different groups, there's many studies that show that children who grow up in low income neighborhoods are more likely to be exposed to poor air quality when they're younger. And that can influence their later health outcomes as they grow older. And so there's all sorts of kind of intersections between sustainability and other almost like metrics or areas of well-being in our society. And I think at the end of the day, the world is a very, very complicated place, but sustainability is, to me, one of the few things that is like unequivocally something that you can get behind. And so I think that's sort of what draws me to it the most.
There we go. Sustainability is maybe one of the ways to make sense of some of that complexity if we do it well. And I love the health metaphor. I find it's really powerful with so many folks that sustainability starts to make sense to them when it's filtered through a lens of better air, better water, better food, better for my family, better for my community, instead of the really large and sometimes slightly esoteric ways we can approach some of it as well. Let's delve in. Could keep talking about your backgrounds, could probe, Prashanthi, your entrepreneurial days, but want to go instead into some of the stuff about the technology, the digital, and what happens when we apply net zero cloud. Prashanthi, first of all, I don't think we can assume everybody listening will know what Agentforce Net Zero Cloud is. Can you just explain the product itself, how it came into the kind of Salesforce wider ecosystem, and what its application looks like?
Sure. So Agentforce Net Zero is a sustainability data management platform. So, firstly, we help large and mid-sized enterprises and organizations in managing that complete end-to-end need on their sustainability side. What does this entail? It's all the way from like aggregating data from like disparate sources, which is where often the biggest challenge lies with many customers. So we really simplify that process. And then once you bring that data, how do you unify the data? How do you like contextualize the data? And often this data is not of high quality. We have lots of issues, with a lot of this data that comes across the enterprise. So we help in improving that quality of data with a big feature that we have called data gap filling. And then afterwards, once this comes in, then it is leveraged for many purposes, all the way from accounting that is for environmental, social governance aspect of accounting, then reporting, which could be for voluntary or compliance reasons, and then number three is help in the visualization of this data so that you can have a very compelling conversation with your internal stakeholders and external stakeholders on what the data looks like or where are you in your journey. And then the last bit, which is why we're all here, which is really bringing a change. How do you actually reduce your emissions for the organization? How do you actually unlock some business value, which could be, bringing in operational efficiencies or bringing in cost efficiencies within the organization? That's the piece that Agentforce really brings to the table as an end-to-end platform. And given it's a Salesforce platform, it of course works very closely with the other apps and the 360 suite, as we call it, which brings in all that enterprise level connectivity and integration. The other part, which I would say is an extension of the offering, is we believe in having an ecosystem. Sustainability is not a solo ride. It's about working with other people. So we have a vast network of partners, all the way from you are a huge partner of ours in terms of, from an implementation and from an advisory angle. But also we have partners who help us from a data standpoint, or we have partners who help us from capability standpoint. So this is something that we really pride in as a platform, in bringing all those capabilities together so that the customer can make it their own, because no two company looks the same. So they can make the platform their own. So that's Agentforce Net Zero Cloud in a nutshell. Now, where did this come from? So, as you know, Salesforce has been in its own sustainability journey for quite some time. I think we're one of those few organizations who pride in having sustainability as its core value, organization's core value. And Salesforce has been doing, lofty commitments and voluntary reporting for quite some time. And like everyone, they also our sustainability and impact team started off with like spreadsheets and Excel files.
Of course they did. It was almost a rule, Prashanthi.
Exactly.
You had to do it that way.
Exactly. That's like the start of the journey. And then you soon realize that it's impossible to manage enterprise level data in spreadsheets and Excel files. Our sustainability team at that time was on a lookout for a solution and realized that there isn't one that actually meets their needs. So they're like, okay, let's build one for ourselves. But then eventually we realized that this can't be a problem just for Salesforce. It's going to be a problem for a lot of enterprises, or there are a lot of organizations out there. And that resulted in the birth of Net Zero Cloud, which is, of course, now called Agentforce Net Zero.
No, it makes sense how it's evolved. And it's so interesting to me that it came really out of trying to solve your own needs and deliver for what your customer zero inside the organization needed in terms of data management. You also remind me, Prashanthi, that we last year, Salesforce and ERM, along with GlobeScan and a couple other partners, did a piece of research on quote unquote the sustainability value creation triangle. And in that, we talked to finance, technology, and sustainability teams inside companies and asked them how they work together, where it works, where it doesn't. And so many things came back to the mutual sharing of the data management challenge. And you, I think, kind of boiled it down into that. We need better information that should enable a clearer vision. And then we can actually take action and improve. And they were all still struggling at the ways to do that better as internal teams inside companies. But clearly, having better data systems, better access was an incredibly important part of that. Meera, Prashanthi mentioned partnership and that our organizations do partner. And maybe you can just pick that up and run with it. What does our partnership look like on this product and more generally if you've experienced it?
So ultimately, right, Salesforce is, as everyone knows, sort of a leading technology platform. It's very deeply incorporated and embedded into businesses all around the world. And similarly, ERM is the world's largest sustainability consultancy. And so there's an incredible amount of sort of just knowledge, I think, that sits within our organization when it comes to understanding how companies should decarbonize, or what is the environmental impact of certain action taken by an organization or governing body or whatever the case may be, right? So ultimately, I think this partnership is about bringing those capabilities together to drive value for organizations and companies, whether that is, client zero like Salesforce or one of the many other organizations that we work with. And I think one of the things that makes our partnership really special is that oftentimes there are conversations that sort of happen within different areas of ERM's business as we, talk to companies about their sustainability goals and their decarbonization goals. And they're oftentimes looking for, something that looks exactly like Net Zero Cloud. And so sort of the ability to kind of cross-pollinate between the work that Prashanthi and team are doing, as well as the work that our clients are trying to do, I think is a really, really important part of our partnership.
So Salesforce has in effect built a platform, a tool that we can bring to others. They know they're looking for it, but they probably don't know exactly what it is. We can kind of fill a gap. And then ERM, I think, supports the implementation of this into other organizations as well. Prashanthi, maybe we can go a bit farther into, so there is a tool, there are organizations like ERM that help Salesforce embed it in other organizations. How does it actually create value? Sure, we're managing data that could be used for compliance or storytelling, but how does that sort of unfold in practice? Do you have an example for us that you can share?
I often say that this is a three-legged stool. One is there is the platform, which basically helps in catering to the needs of the customer, least common denominator across different customers. And then there is always someone on the advisory side, and which is where ERM plays such a big role in the partnership, where you have to advise the customer on what is sustainability, what does it mean for you, and how do you kind of make it your own. And then there's the last piece, which is the actual implementation part of it. And since we are a platform, it's about how do you make the platform bringing in value to the customer. So this is part of the three legs to it. Now, coming back to how is it that customers can derive value, in addition to, of course, making it their own so that it is meaningful to their own industry and their own business. I would say some of the big examples that we've seen is, in addition to, of course, doing accounting and reporting both for compliance and voluntary purposes, I think the real value that we've seen with some of the customers is how they have used sustainability data along with the rest of the enterprise data to truly drive some operational changes. So we have a customer who's a huge, huge retailer, and they really looked at their sustainability data, and they were able to save 5% of their overall utility costs, because they saw that there's a big difference between their sustainability emissions data versus the number of buildings that they have. And there was something amiss in that. And then they realized, okay, we've been paying utility bills for buildings whose leases ended quite some time back. So
Oh, no.
this is
Yeah.
one such example, but we have many examples like this where, we've had some customers who've used it for reducing their product cost, other customers who've really brought in energy efficiency to reduce their energy bills. So these are genuine examples of people using sustainability data, in addition to, of course, all the simplifications it can bring in around, how do you bring in the data? How do you simplify the data? How do you improve the quality of data? Because in reality, sustainability and impacting members, they're not big teams. We believe the biggest role that we play, thanks to, the flexibility of the platform along with its agentic and AI capabilities, is to take away that manual effort away from them so that the sustainability team members can focus on higher order strategic tasks. And this is where I'm super excited about the partnership that we have, because that truly helps in unlocking that value for our customers.
So, time saving, one of the things, finding information gaps, that story about, paying for energy in buildings that are no longer actually part of your portfolio. So practical cost savings, but also the kind of gap you want to close. And you mentioned flexibility. And Meera, maybe I can bring this across to you. So we've got, a platform, kind of a tool, but companies are so different. Industries and sectors are so different. So how, when you're supporting implementation of Net Zero Cloud or Agentforce Net Zero, do we adapt it as we move from client to client, company to company, sort of situation to situation?
Like you said, there's many different sort of ways that Net Zero Cloud can look from customer to customer. And one of our leading greenhouse gas protocol experts here at ERM, one thing that he always says is, the greenhouse gas protocol, it is designed to be flexible. And so I think part of our job here at ERM is to essentially look at a customer and figure out, okay, based on, your industry and your size and the different organizationally relevant emission sources, what does that flexibility look like for you? And what does Net Zero Cloud need to look like for you? So a lot of sort of what we do is get to know our customers very deeply and understand, how do they operate on a day-to-day basis and what does their emissions profile look like? And then after that, we go into the actual how of the process. And like you said, it looks very different to lots of different customers.
And this might take us a step further away from the product or the platform itself, Meera, but once the platform is in place, the data is available. Are you seeing examples of how people then can connect the data and or the sustainability insights that come from it to their broader commercial narrative and to shift business outcomes? Is that starting to happen, or is that still what we're hoping for down the road?
I think it's starting to happen slowly but surely. And I do think that is absolutely sort of where things are going to go in the next, 10, 20 years. So lots of times what we've started to see is, companies wanting to be able to quantify, for instance, on the product level, what is the carbon footprint of my specific product that I'm selling to customers? And And they want to share this information, not just for their own, emissions accounting purposes, but also to be able to share that with their customers who might be eco-conscious consumers, as well as their stakeholders or their investors who may also be placing importance on this sort of thing. And so I think we're slowly moving towards a place where, for a while, sustainability was a very siloed function within the business. But I think that we're slowly moving towards the stage where sustainability is becoming embedded within sales, service, marketing, and it really every part of a business and its operations. We're seeing a lot of really cool sort of crossover use cases where clients are finding that, sustainability is not just something that's good because it's good, but it can also be good for business and for your bottom line, which is always a great thing.
Yeah, it's a little bit like your health example from earlier that I feel overwhelmingly in narrative and in practice that sustainability is most effective when it's actually better, right? That we
Mhm.
can't ask people to make a trade-off. We need to offer them something that says, if you do this, your business is going to be more robust, more resilient, more successful over the short and long term. We also can't ask them to wait forever.
Can I also add one thing to what Meera said? Meera made a very interesting point, which is
Mm.
sustainability is no longer an afterthought, but it's such an embedded and an integral part of what organizations are doing. And I think it's very important to underpin that further is because invariably you see people start off with reporting as their first place where they start. And at that point of time, it's about help me, give me some budget so that I can function and do my compliance reports.
Mhm.
But the moment you start looking at sustainability data, it's basically moving the needle from being a cost center to a revenue center. And at that point of time, you're having credible conversations with your stakeholders, not just around, okay, I'm helping you with compliance reporting, but I'm actually truly helping you and changing some of your existing operations so that your operations can be more efficient or you can save more costs. And so at that point of time, you're not the only person pushing for sustainability as an impact team member. The entire organization is going to be rallying around you, which I feel is a very important, movement or a change that is happening now. And it's more realistic, if I may, in the recent past.
Yeah, I'd love to draw you out a little further on that because I wanted to ask you about compliance, which you touched there, but you also talked very much about what's beyond compliance. And so I'm curious about two things. One, the regulatory environment has been shifting in more than one direction, right? There was a steady march going on for a while, and now we've seen some regulation or legislation that was expected, like with the SEC here in the US, just put on the shelf indefinitely. Of course, Omnibus in Europe is changing the CSRD. And yet, in other parts of the world, new sustainability related regulation, climate disclosure related especially, is charging forward. So, just how does Agentforce Net Zero play across the shifting regulatory landscape? And then we'll come maybe after that to the and beyond compliance. What can you do once you've met what is required and add value in that way?
One thing that we have seen is, first of all, it comes with a lot of heartburn. Given the whole volatility that people see in the situation, it definitely causes a lot of heartburn at the end of,
Yeah, I was thinking heartache, heartburn is perfect. Yeah.
yeah, about
Yeah.
sustainability practitioners and impacting members. So I think the first thing that we definitely help our customers with is how do you reduce the manual workload that goes around actually generating reports, building reports, all the way from what data should I be looking after about? How do I bring that in? Can I simplify my first draft disclosure? Do I have data traceability? Where is the source of the data? The validity of the data so that, the data assurance process can be simplified. And given some of the recent investments we've been making in Agentforce around the agentic and the AI capabilities, that is further, helping customers, more towards the strategic side of things rather than, focus on the manual piece. The other part which we are seeing, which is good, is even though there is a lot of volatility, but there are certain areas where there's a lot of convergence, especially on the environmental side of the reporting piece, there's quite a lot of convergence. And irrespective of, one average statistic that the stat that we heard was a large enterprise on an average has around 30 reports that they file in a year. And of those 30 reports, you are not starting net new for each of those reports. There's probably uh, 40% of the data that is common across those 30 reports, which you have already identified. And there's probably a subset that is common between one or two reports, which is there. And then the number of data points that are like very unique to a particular report, it starts reducing. So we really focus on that piece in terms of number one, keeping the data models up to date, which is basically where all the data are stored. And then the second part of it is how do you kind of crystallize it all in? We have this fabulous feature called information library, which is to like bring that information in and you can like store it into different snippets. And then from those snippets, how do you eventually generate it into different reports? That could be a Word document or you can work with any other provider who does like XBRL tagging and that last mile reporting if I mean.
But sort of assuming there that for many customers, probably meeting the compliance demands is a huge driver to put this in place.
Yeah.
But I think at ERM, it's fair to say that we see compliance as a starting point, and that if that's all you do, you've probably left a lot on the table. So I'm curious what evidence you're seeing of what people do next.
Yeah, I think the first journey that people always start is how do you use the sustainability data and then start reducing some of the things that are within the control of the impact of the sustainability team, which is reduce energy costs, reduce costs around waste, because those are normally data points that they have access to. And then they're able to collaborate very closely with, say, their real estate team or their, utilities team to do it. And then we see customers who are a little more sophisticated where they have data in their scope 3. No one has pretty data in scope 3, but folks who have a little more or who've been doing it for some time, they start marrying this data with the rest of the enterprise data. So just to give you an example, we have an auto manufacturer, and what they do is they look at their flagship vehicles and they look at the key components that contribute towards that flagship vehicle. And those key components, they look at the BOM, which is something that comes from their procurement system. They look at the quantity that they've procured. All those things come from their other ERP systems and financial systems. And then they use the emissions data that comes from us to get a holistic view of, okay, which supplier is contributing the most. And then they use this data effectively to compare and contrast and see, should I be going with supplier A or should I be going with supplier B? Supplier A, who has a more complicated logistic network compared to supplier B, who maybe has not complied with some of the human rights related aspects or does not have, a commitment made with SBTi. So I think at that point of time, you start making a more informed decision. And these data sets are no longer in silo. Everyone can view it and you start getting a holistic point of view, which is not just tied down to the sustainability teams. Any other team member can also see. So I think that's the power of how you can unlock those views and, if I may even use the word, democratize some of these insights so that it's not just a push action, but there's also pull action coming in from the rest of the org.
So Prashanthi, I was so interested in that. I agree 100%. I see that democratization of data. And then you also hit this other note or point about how this is becoming a competitive factor, and it can let organizations either distinguish when competing with one another for business or let an original equipment manufacturer in a value chain look at potential suppliers and make better choices about which of them to do future work with based on their carbon-related performance. And Meera, I just wondered, is that one of the reasons people are coming to ERM and saying, please help us implement this tool? We need to position ourselves better in the marketplace.
Absolutely. I think that there is a lot when it comes, especially to scope 3 and those value chain emissions. There becomes a lot of crossover between the priorities of one organization and the priorities of all of the other organizations that surround it. And so we've been seeing that a lot where, whether it is a company near the top of the value chain where they're, supplying to companies that then need to be compliant, or vice versa, companies who are, the recipient of certain goods are needing to then quantify what is their scope 3 emissions. Both of those scenarios create conversations of how do we first quantify, what is the impact or the footprint of that organization? And then 2, how do we make smarter decisions for our supply chain when it comes to becoming more efficient, becoming more resilient, and ultimately, building relationships with other suppliers who share our priorities for compliance and decarbonization. And so it's almost a bit infectious, I think, when
I
it
like
comes
that.
to sustainability, right? Because it's, you might be a company who isn't necessarily, you might not have enough revenue to be subject to something like the California regulations. But the companies that you're selling to might have enough revenue. And so they'll be asking for that information. And so I think, like you said before, Mark, the regulations are a starting point, and it's creating a lot of sort of cross-pollination between a lot of different organizations as they begin to define, okay, what are our priorities over the next 5-10 years, and how do we accomplish those? And a lot of times accomplishing those is not, an internal organization task. It's something that requires the cooperation of both you and the people upstream and downstream in your value chain.
Great. Yeah, two things there stood out for me. One is you neatly took what I said about competition and said, yes, Mark, but it's also an incredible opportunity for value chain collaboration. So point very well made. I think, no organization within a value chain can actually track scope 3 in particular without kind of an incredibly cooperative approach up and down that value chain. And then your point about, you might not be regulated, but if your customer is, you may as well be. And that was a point I heard over and over at Climate Week in New York this year, that folks just saying, yeah, it doesn't matter if you're now outside the CSRD box or if you're not going to be covered in California in January. If your customers are, you are going to get the same question, and you should act like you are and prepare like you are. I'm going to change directions again. I know our time's getting a little bit short. And Prashanthi, I want to come back to you. We've had this conversation with AI kind of assumed almost, and maybe we should have started here, frankly, but let's make sure we talk about it before we end. So I think it's safe to say that Agentforce Net Zero has been working to really integrate AI and AI agents, and that's supposed to help. And that's the general message to the world right now about AI is it's supposed to help, and not everybody fully grasps yet how. So can you tell us how it's being built in, what opportunities that creates to accelerate, improve, enhance sustainability reporting and decision making, or anything else that comes from this?
Absolutely. I'm happy to share some of the use cases we already have in the platform today, and also share what's offer a sneak peek into what's coming up as well. So what we have today is a big problem that many customers have is connecting data. Now, yes, you may have data in your data lakes, enterprise systems, which is okay, but there's still always going to be a lot of manual data that's floating around, which many team members, either within the company or outside the company, have. So we have a mechanism using the data collection agent where we simplify the process. So the agent really helps you in tracking whom you should be getting this data from, by when did you get the data or not. And so it takes away all that manual effort. So that's one very practical use of, an agent. But the second part of it, which we've started also exploring, and a big part of our roadmap, is how do you help our customers identify where the true problem lies? Because today, if you see, you get the data, unless and until you're a data analyst yourself, it's really hard to figure out where should I be focusing or what should I be doing. So that's the part which we want to really simplify using Agentforce, where you exactly point out that these are the areas you should be focused on. Focus on these suppliers or focus on these particular product categories. That's where the most of the problems are. That's where the highest emissions are. And then from there, it really simplifies further in terms of taking those actions. And then eventually, as Meera mentioned, either managing the reputation risk that comes with it or driving some of those operational gains, it becomes easier. And this is where we have a lot of capabilities around scenario modeling, anomaly detection, and hotspot analysis, which is a really big part of our roadmap. And the last piece is, yes, these are some capabilities that we offer in the product, but we also have a custom builder mechanism. So customers can build their own agents, make it their own for their own needs. So we've seen some very interesting use cases come from our customers where some people are looking at, how do I compare this current framework that we have that's coming versus what data do I have? What gaps are there? How am I faring? How does my quality of data look like? Am I ready for my assurance process? So there's all those kind of use cases that are coming in. And I'm sure there'll be more use cases that will come as time goes by when people start getting their hands dirty with Agentforce and some of the other capabilities out there.
Great. So you led us through all of the easier and simpler aspects of this, but then also to the possibility to customize and really make it specific to an organization's particular needs. And I like both sides of that. Our time together is coming close to an end, but I want to squeeze in one last question for each of you. So it'll need to be a bit of a lightning round. Meera, I wanted to come to you first. And we've sort of, broadly, I guess, been kind of making the case here in the conversation today for cloud solutions as part of people's sustainability approach. And I think many organizations are considering this. They might be partway down that path. Are there kind of 1, 2, 3 steps or best practices that you recommend to companies generally as they're starting to make decisions on this journey? Like, where should they start? What should they put in place to make a good decision and then move forward?
I would say maybe the first recommendation that I would have is just start early. Technology and implementing technology is oftentimes, a massive headache when it comes to organizations and all of the data and the technologies that organizations today are needing to juggle, right? But the sooner that we can, start to manage our sustainability data, the easier it will become in the long term to really wrap our arms around what that data means and begin to make informed decisions on that, whether that is operational decisions or regulatory decisions. The second thing that I would say is consider the people aspect of it. Sustainability is a very new function for a lot of companies. And, by new, I don't mean, maybe it started yesterday, but compared to how long a lot of these companies have been around, it's only within really the last decade or two that lots of people started talking about sustainability. And so I think that would be my next sort of recommendation would be to talk to the people in your organization and really figure out, what are people's priorities and how can we leverage sustainability to make their day-to-day jobs easier, to make their day-to-day operations better. Because oftentimes sustainability, as it applies to operational efficiencies, can be one of those levers that you can use. And so, I would just say start early and think broadly, because sustainability really, when it comes down to the value that your organization will get from it, the broader and earlier you start, the better.
Yeah, the start early is coupled, I think, with there's a cost of inaction. Yeah, I think lots of folks kind of look out and they're waiting for this landscape to resolve itself. And my belief is that it'll probably be too late. You'll wish you would have acted while the landscape was still unsettled and had some first mover advantage. And then really powerful, I think, what you said, that there's a cultural element to this as well. Prashanthi, different closing question for you. We're recording this episode of Sustainable Connections at the end of October in 2025. So Dreamforce just passed. And I have to tell you, I had a colleague I was chatting with on an instant message chain. And I said, I'm going to Dreamforce today, so I'll have to pick that up tomorrow. And she didn't know what Dreamforce was. So she said, oh my God, that is the most fantastic thing I've ever heard. Is that real? And it is real. So one, can you tell us quickly what Dreamforce is? And then can you tell us something really exciting about Agentforce Net Zero that you picked up at this year's Dreamforce and why that's got you excited for maybe the 12 months ahead?
Firstly, before I get to that, I completely second what Meera said. Super important to start early and use data and people. Dreamforce, by the way, is Salesforce's flagship event that happens on an annual basis where we have thousands of customers, partners, system integrators who basically come in. Salesforce really shows a lot about the investments that it has made on the product front. There's always fun announcements that always happens at Dreamforce. And then we have a lot of conversations around how do we use it? How is it that customers are using, some of the technologies of Salesforce? And the learnings are often big. And for people who are also big into music, there's always a big concert.
There's always a concert. Yeah. It is a fun event as well as a serious event, has been my experience.
Yeah. It is a fun event. I would just call it as a celebration of technology and, people coming in together. I would say this time's Dreamforce was amazing on so many levels because we heard the following things from our customers. Number one is we had our customers create a community, actually, almost. The first time we saw our customers interact with one another rather than, them seeing as, okay, this is that person coming from there. Communities are becoming stronger and they're learning from one another, and everyone feels like we're in this journey together. So that's, I think, number one. Number two is data continues to be a problem and a challenge. And, there's constant focus on how do I improve it? How do I focus further? The third takeaway that I have is something that we spoke earlier. Sustainability no longer seems to be an afterthought for many of these customers. They have definitely started using that in credible storytelling. The part that was very powerful for me was, yes, reporting, accounting, and the other hard metrics, but people use data for credible storytelling, both inside the organization as well as outside the organization, so that their stakeholders know how sustainability actually brings in value. And that it was powerful on so many levels and helped many of these people pivot from just being a cost center to like a revenue center. So I would say those are like my three big takeaways. And I would be missing on something big if I don't say that people were not, I would say more than curious about AI, because everyone wants to get their hands dirty and see how they can leverage AI to, like, number one, simplify lives. I can safely say that I know there's a lot of fear around AI taking away jobs, but this is one place where people should not have that fear, because we have very few human beings who are actually doing this. So it's okay that AI takes some of the jobs so that we can focus on some of the, the strategic side of things. And that seems to be a welcome change across the board.
Yeah, a really nice note to end on, actually, that sense of optimism around what the technology can do for us. For everybody who's chosen to listen to us today, I've been talking with Prashanthi Sudhakar from Salesforce, where she is the head of product for Agentforce Net Zero, and also with my colleague Meera Krishnan, who is a managing consultant for Net Zero Cloud Solutions at ERM. Want to say a final thank you to both of you, Prashanthi and Meera, for your time and for your insight. For folks who are interested in the podcast, all the other episodes are available on erm.com or on your platform of choice. So get out there and listen to that back catalog. If you have any comments or thoughts for us, we would love to hear them. Thanks so much for listening today.